Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we get started with the stories, I wanted to give some warnings for story number 2, for brief mentioning of sexual assault near the end of the story, as well as animal violence. Not animal abuse, but there's some mentioning of some animals who die in a very graphic way. It was kind of hard for me to even narrate some of that. So if you don't want to hear stories like that, now you know, and now you know to skip them. I'll also have those stories labeled in the timestamps. Without any more further interruptions, let's go ahead and get started with the stories. And remember to always stay hungry. This happened a couple of years back, so my memory is a bit foggy. For context, I live close to a highway that stretches across almost the whole state. The part of the highway that I live near is really popular due to many restaurants, cafes, and various shops. And every year in the summer, the city closes down a section of the highway to throw a street party. The entire community is invited, and there are stalls, rides, live music, and food, kind of like a mini carnival. I was a 14-year-old girl, and a group of around 5 of my friends and I decided to check out the street party. I've been a couple of times before, and a couple of times since. It's pretty fun, usually. Along the highway, there's a small shopping center next to a sketchy park. My friends and I decided to go and sit down in the park a bit to get a break from the crowd since it was pretty busy. While we were heading past the shopping center, we had walked past around 4 dodgy-looking older teens, probably around 17 to 18. One of them walked into us as we were passing, and then they all started laying into us about watching where we were going. Being young and scared, we just apologized and walked to the park. When we got to the park, we had sat down and were chatting when we had looked over to the shopping center and saw that the teens were still staring us down, pointing at us. They then started to yell at us to stop staring at them and came charging towards us. When they got near us, they kept asking us to fight, saying they were going to bash us up. Had it happened to me now, I would have fully squared up, but being so young, I was shitting my pants. I saw an older man sitting nearby, and I walked quickly over to him, telling him the situation and asking him for help, but the fucker pretended to be deaf to avoid getting involved. To this day, that's something that pisses me off more than anything else about this story. When I realized it'd be no help, I beckoned my friends over and we walked back towards the street party. We did this so there would be more people around and less chances of us getting the shit beaten out of us. We walked around the party for a while, and by this time it was getting pretty dark. I was still totally on edge and even more freaked out when I realized they were following us, waiting for us to be alone. At one point when we were reaching a quieter part of the highway, I saw them coming up to us again, but luckily I saw a neighbor that I knew and ran over to him and began talking to him. They walked past us staring daggers. When they were out of view, I had said bye to my neighbor, and my friends and I continued back down the highway to the main area. We reached the part of the highway near the shopping center again, where there were a bunch of carnival-like game stalls, the ones where you win prizes. There were so many people around, and so though I was still anxious, I felt relatively safe. That was when the teens came up behind us and then circled us against the stalls. I remember them yelling at me, saying how I slept with one of their brothers, how I'm a slut and I'm gonna get what I deserve. I don't even remember what they said to my friends. Keep in mind, this is the first time I've ever seen these people, and I was 14. Then, like it was in slow motion, one of them counted down from 3, and on 1 they all jumped on us, punching and kicking. All I remember is grabbing one of the girls in front of me by her hair and then hitting her. Then about 2 of them beat me to the ground. No one around us did anything. They all just watched while a bunch of kids got jumped for absolutely no reason. When the teens were satisfied, they ran off, and my friends and I were left bruised and totally freaked out. Luckily, I wasn't hurt too badly, but my glasses had been broken. Another of my friends had received a pretty bad hit to the head and a lump was already forming. I started crying, and I saw one of my friend's moms walking over to me, who then took me home. When I got home, I had told my parents what happened, and they were pissed. My dad got up and left without saying anything, until he messaged me 20 minutes later sending me pictures of every group of teens that he saw and asking if they were the ones who had jumped us. He didn't find them, and I'm glad he didn't, because God only knows what he would have done to them. My mom took me to the police station and I gave them a rundown of what happened, but ultimately there was nothing they could do. What upsets me the most is how no one did anything. There were adults all around us who could have stepped in, who could have stopped it, but everyone just watched, totally letting us down. I did hear from a mate that a guy in the year above us at school had caught wind of what had happened and went hunting for the teens to smash them back up. My aunt and uncle who were doing the traffic control for the party also kept an eye out, but they must have gone home right after jumping us because no one could find them. It's nice to know that there were people looking out for us afterwards, but it would have been even better if someone stepped in the first place. So to those teenagers who beat up me and my friends for no reason, who turned me into an anxious mess who was scared to go along the highway for so long, I hope that you're all rotting. And if I ever see you around the streets again, I'll get more than one punch in this time. This is a recollection of the weirdest night of my life, where both the universe and my gut was screaming no and I continued to ignore it. But by some twist of fate, I had made it out without being harmed. A little backstory first. I was freshly 18 and female. One day on Facebook, I had received a message and friend request from someone who we'll call Kurt. The message was simply complimenting me on my recently updated X-Files Facebook banner. When I saw who exactly Kurt was, I was surprised but intrigued. Kurt was in a relationship with the ex of my at the time partner's ex. We'll call her Courtney, and she was also 18, but that's a whole other story. But for time's sake, it was a weird connection and really interesting that Kurt was poking at me, as he definitely knew who I was to some degree. Kurt was 25 years old, but being very freshly 18, I didn't think it was weird that this 25-year-old man was so eager to seek me out as a friend. Anyway, after a few months of seemingly innocent texting and getting to know one another as friends, as well as occasional and semi-pressure for NSFW pics, but never enough to scare me off, it was even a little exciting for me because my partner was neglectful in every meaning of the word. But anyways, I decided that I wanted to hang out with him in person. He lived in my hometown, and I had recently moved to a city 45 minutes away with my partner and their family. My partner was controlling and weird about me being around men, even as friends. But it got to a point where my partner finally allowed me to hang out with Kurt in person. Yes, allowed. So we had made plans to drive the 45 minutes back to our hometown, where I would spend the night at Kurt's house to hang out, and my partner would stay at their mom's house in town. An important note for later: my window on the passenger side was broken to where it was stuck in the down position, meaning the window was stuck open. This is where it gets crazy. We had started the drive after 9 p.m., so it was already dark out. We had already been lightly arguing about me staying at Kurt's. Well, my partner decided to take the back road instead of the usual highway because of the broken window. Maybe 20 minutes into the drive, my partner hits a raccoon. This was pretty upsetting for the both of us, as they had never hit an animal before. So they had pulled over, and we actually then cried for a second, then gathered our emotions. I got out of the car and picked up some flowers from the side of the road and then laid them on the raccoon. I get back in the car and we start driving. Not even 10 minutes later, the baseball cap they were wearing flies out of the window. It was their favorite hat, so they had started crying again, thinking it was karma for killing the raccoon. I felt sad for them, so I had told them to pull over again and I would look for the hat. I wandered down the dark road in search of the hat, which I had managed to find. I then got back in the car and we continued to drive. I shit you not, 5 or so minutes later, we turned into the most back road of the night. It's like a horror movie in my head. Let me set the scene for you. We live in Wisconsin, so it's just flat farmland in between cities. All you can see is the road ahead of you lit by the headlights. The first thing I saw was the road covered in red, spots at first, which quickly turned into streaks, which became large patches of red in the middle of the road. This is happening at 65 miles per hour, so after seeing the red, my eyes look up and I see the most horrific sight I've yet to see in my life. Two glowing eyes quickly looking up from the streaks of red that was suddenly turning into piles of guts and gore galore. I interpreted it as a deer that had been hit and drug along the road, and that another animal was eating the remains of the dead one. My partner later told me that they interpreted the scene as a dog that had been hit, and that the alive animal was another dog that was just standing in the middle of the road staring at the dead one, as if it had been mourning. All of these thoughts happening in the matter of seconds, both my partner and I started screaming bloody murder. The road was just a mess of literal guts and blood, the entire road. They immediately slowed the car down because of whatever was in the middle of the road eating the other, and in a split-second decision, they then yelled over our screams, "We have to drive over it!" So we did, slowly but as fast as we could. The sound and feel, even as a passenger, was mortifying. After they got over whatever it was that was hit, they pretty much immediately pulled over again because we were both still screaming at the top of our lungs in utter horror. That's how awful the sight had been. There was a barn or farmhouse about a driveway's away distance from where we pulled over. I can't remember which it was. It mostly just added to the ambience. It reminded me of the Courage the Cowardly Doghouse. Still screaming, I realized that my window was broken completely open. I had a flash of thought of whatever was eating the thing in the middle of the road was going to jump through the window and attack us, which didn't happen, but the fear was very real. We were only pulled over the third time for maybe 1 minute before my partner then realized that we both felt we were in danger, so they continued to drive. We barely even had time to process this next horrific scene. I'm not going to get into the details because it was very graphic, but we basically saw 4 to 6 dead animals on the ground, and it was gory. We had to swerve to not hit the ones that were still barely alive. We're both practically hysterical at this point, so we just keep on driving. Only being less than 10 or 15 minutes away from our destination, we keep going. We finally arrive at my partner's mom's house, the first stop before my partner drives me to Kurt's house. My partner asks me to not sleep over at Kurt's, but I refuse to cancel because I'd already been forced to so many times. We enter their mom's house and their mom and brother are there. We both walk in tears, promising we'll tell what happened after we both take a moment in the bathroom together and then hug out our awful drive there. As we're both hugging in the bathroom, my partner then suddenly yelps and pushes me away, swatting at my shoulder, then screaming that there was a spider in my hair. After that, we obviously cried some more because what the actual fuck? They were then begging me not to go to Kurt's, but I still wanted to go, so I go. Kurt lived in a big house with his grandmother and friend Dylan, also around 25 years old. The night starts out chill. The 3 of us go into a shed in the back that had been converted to a hangout shed to smoke some weed. After smoking a ton, Kurt breaks out the beer. Mind you, I was only 18. I didn't have much experience being crossfaded quite yet, so I was really feeling it. I have no idea how much I drank, but I can guess that I tried to keep up with the boys. I remember that I started to feel nervous when another one of Kurt's buddies had stopped by, who was a much older grown man, probably in his early 40s. He was giving me weird vibes, and it must have shown because Kurt assured me that he was cool. That's when the man also noticed I was uncomfortable, and they all started teasing me about it, asking me, "How old are you again?" That was when I started to feel major red flags. My memory of this part of the night is a little spotty. Somehow the conversation shifted and the man eventually left. It was pretty late at this point, probably past midnight, so I asked if we could go to sleep. Dylan agrees and we all go inside. Kurt makes a point to tell me that we don't have to worry about being loud inside the house because his grandma wears hearing aids and was asleep already. Since it was such a big house, I figured I'd sleep on the couch or in the guest room. He had gave me a tour of the house when I got there. So I asked Kurt, So where am I gonna sleep? And he kinda chuckles a little and then said, well, I figured you'd sleep in my room with me. I nervously agree, not feeling like I had much of a choice suddenly. We go to his room and it's like covered in torn out pages of Rolling Stone magazines. Like the entire floor was crinkly with magazine pages, you couldn't even see the carpet at all. He only had a twin-size mattress, so I awkwardly lay on the only open space on the floor, which was at the front of his bed, which was still covered in magazine pages. He gets in his bed, tosses me a pillow and blanket, and then turns the lights out so it's pitch black in the room. I try to make myself comfortable on the magazine pages floor, but every single movement I made noise, even just my breathing. So I lay there motionless for a while, feeling really uncomfortable, like a deer in the headlights. After what I guessed was about 20 minutes of just laying there waiting for him to fall asleep first, I realized my phone was dying. So as quietly as I can, which was not very quietly because of the fucking magazine pages, I try to plug my phone into the outlet, which is right at the foot of his bed, only an arm's length away. I was staring at the shadow of his feet, watching for any sign of movement. I didn't even reach the outlet yet when his feet then moved, but it wasn't his feet. It was his head. He was laying so his head was at the foot of the bed, way closer to me. The movement was just his head going from resting on his cheek to his chin, like he'd been watching me lay there. I froze as I saw the movement, and the magazine crinkling stopped, and the room went silent. A second passes of me being frozen with my arm half extended out, when he breaks the silence by then saying, "What are you doing?" He said it with a low, deep, almost monotone voice, which was very different from the way he normally spoke. My heart was pounding. I started shaking. I was confused as to why I felt so scared. I then quietly said, "Just plugging in my phone." I quickly plug it in and lay back down, my eyes never leaving the shadow of his head. He said nothing after that. He didn't rest his head back down on his cheek. Didn't even move. Seemingly, he was just staring at me with his head in the same position. I remembered what he said about his grandma, knowing Dylan slept in the basement and we were on the 3rd floor. My brain couldn't even fathom what exactly I was afraid was going to happen to me. I remember thinking that I just wasn't going to sleep for the night. I couldn't tell you how long we laid there like that, but I did eventually fall asleep, and before I knew it, it was morning and Kurt was already awake sitting up in his bed. With the sun returned to normalcy, I realized I was just being paranoid the entire night and that Kurt would never actually want to hurt me. We smoked a goodbye joint and my partner picked me up asking with a cold shoulder if I had a nice night. I didn't tell him what happened because nothing did happen. A few months passed and I ended up also befriending Courtney, the girl Kurt was dating that was the ex of my partner's ex, and eventually they broke up. At first, Courtney told me that she still wanted me to be friends with Kurt because he needed someone like me in his life. So I did, and I ended up accidentally playing matchmaker and I had hooked up Kurt with another friend of mine. When I told Courtney that I hooked up Kurt with this other friend, that's when she spilled the tea and informed me that Kurt was a dangerous person. She showed me texts from him saying that he was going to kill her, and so many pictures of bruises mostly on her neck from being strangled. Even a court case once where she had lied to me about what happened, that he had beat her up and not some random guy walking down the street like she said. I went to call my friend in fear to tell her to stay away from Kurt. Coincidentally, she had already texted me to tell me that Kurt had sexually assaulted her. I apologized profusely and supported her through her emotions the best I could. I felt so guilty for introducing them. Finding all that out after that night at Kurt's made me wonder, what was he planning in his bedroom that night, and what made him decide not to do it? I felt like my fate was set in stone due to how much the universe was trying to tell me no, but thank God Kurt decided not to do whatever he was going to do. I never spoke to him again. I now take that night as a big lesson learned, and if your gut and the universe is telling you not to do something, please just don't do it. I was just very, very lucky that night. I'm pretty sure Kurt is in jail now. I live in the US, but my family heritage is from Jamaica. I have a bunch of uncles and aunties over there, as well as cousins and family friends. My mom and dad and I always visit in the summer every year, and have done since I was a kid. I'm 17 now, but this happened when I was 14. I was excited to visit as this is a trip I always looked forward to. My uncle met us at the airport and we had a car booked from the hotel to take us to the hotel. My uncle was just there for the ride for some reason. When we got in, we had saw a car and hopped in without thinking. The driver said hello and just began driving us without asking us where we were going, but this didn't seem odd since he was with the hotel. My parents and I were in the back and our uncle was in the front with the driver and we were just talking. The driver didn't join in as usually the drivers do, but again, it didn't seem that weird. My family would book different hotels, but we always got a car to drive us there. Well, after a while, the conversation started to die down and I noticed my parents seemed a little tense. I wasn't sure why at first, but I began to grow uneasy too. We had been driving for an hour and we were on some back dirt roads with no signs or anything. My parents kept exchanging worried glances and my uncle was trying to engage the driver in conversation, to which he was ignored. The car ended up silent and I remember looking for my phone in my cardigan pocket because I was nervous, but I knew we wouldn't have signal up in these roads. Eventually my uncle straight up demanded where the fuck we were, but the driver just hushed him. It wasn't aggressive, but something about it made my uncle not push any further, and my uncle isn't exactly the shy type. A short while later, the driver began to slow down, and I stared at my parents who were both staring at me tight-lipped. My uncle was shifting in the back seat, and a horrible feeling of dread filled my stomach. The car stopped, and there was a log or something in front of it. The driver got out and moved it, and then hopped back in the car and continued to drive really slowly. He was only out of the car for like 2 minutes, but when he left I had pulled out my phone, and sure enough, no signal. My parents did the same thing to the same result. My uncle said we should get out of the car and make a run for it, but we didn't because we were too afraid. Besides, we didn't even know where we were, and the roads were so scary that it seemed safer to be in the car. As crazy as that sounds. The driver kept going slow before he had slowed to a stop. I felt sick because there was about 10 men all standing around with their own cars in front of us. I felt like I was going to shit myself when the driver got out of the car and one of the guys approached him. The men were looking in the car and I was scared they would kill us. The driver moved forward and all of the men walked towards him. I don't know what happened, but the driver turned around and walked back to his car like nothing was going on. He proceeded to wave at the men and drive back slowly, till he'd reached a point in the road where he could turn and begin driving forward again. The atmosphere was thick in the car, and we were all confused, terrified, and hopeful. We continued driving in agonizing silence out of the back roads back to the more populated areas and finally to the hotel. When we arrived, the driver said nothing, and we all flew out of that car like it was molten lava on the seats. I felt like I'd escaped from a shitty horror movie. I shat my guts out in the hotel bathroom the second I got in there. I even stripped off and jumped in the shower because I was sweating so badly. My parents were furious once the fear subsided and they complained to the hotel, but they were pretty useless. My uncle kicked up a storm and they assured us they would speak to the driver, but we have no idea if they ever did or not. The entire trip was a little marked by that incident. My uncle wanted us to stay with him, but my parents didn't want our money going to waste. After that year though, we never used that same hotel again, and we actually did end up staying with my uncle on subsequent visits after this. I don't know what that driver was doing, but he literally made me shit myself in fear. I'm just glad it wasn't us anyone was after. The back roads in Jamaica are pretty dangerous, so it was a pretty terrifying experience. I'm just glad I made it out all right. Hey everyone, that's about it for today's stories. If you have your own story that you would like to send, you can send it in at southerncannibal.com, or you can email it at southerncannibalstories@gmail.com. I look forward to telling your story. Have a good night or good day, everyone. And remember to always